Hello everyone, my name's Chuck Rinaldi. I think you all know that by now. And on behalf of Dr. Barbara Iannarelli and myself, I want to welcome you to the final video in EDU 599, chapters 7 and 8. In this video, we're going to illustrate the major concepts which are outlined by Bernhardt in chapters 7 and 8. In particular, bringing together all the exercises and assignments that you were involved in as you worked on chapters 3, 4, 5, and 6. I am filming at home. I have a fan on because it's really quite hot. I'm outside on my deck. Because I'm on my deck, you'll also hear cars going by occasionally. I'm sorry about that, but if NU pays its adjuncts more, maybe I'll build a studio one of these days. Also behind me, you'll notice that I have some bird feeders, and if we're lucky, our pileated woodpeckers will show up. They're very large birds. They look like this in Eden and have this sound. However, it's my understanding that in Lewiston, where Dr. B lives, the pileated woodpeckers look a bit more like this guy and have a very distinctive call. Sounds more like this. Alright, now let's begin chapter 7, which Bernhardt titles, How Did We Get to Where We Are? Or Looking Across All the Data. How did we get to where we are now? I want to quote right out of Bernhardt to get us started. She says that by starting with an in-depth appraisal of where your school is on the 4 types of data described in chapters 3, 4, 5, and 6, you know these, the demographics, perception, student learning, and school process data, and organizing them into a comprehensive school data profile, your school staff will have the story of the school showing the results they are getting with the process they are currently implementing. You want to look across all data types because this is important for seeing how the different things relate to each other and really exposing the weaknesses in your school and in your school community and how those strengths and weaknesses actually work together to either promote student learning or to inhibit it. And if you can create improvement plans that are based on all the types of data, you're able to move your system forward. Not just one particular area, but move your whole system forward more efficiently and effectively. And if you want to take a look and go a little more in depth than I'm going to do in this video, take a look at Appendix H in the Bernhardt text for supplemental resources that will help you in the real-world setting. Now what you're going to notice in the Bernhardt text, not Appendix H, but in the text proper, Chapter 7, that she talks about 6 different steps that you can take to arrive at a comprehensive school data profile. The first step is to create a data profile for each category of data, which you have already done. In these make-believe assignments which you've been involved in, you've created a data profile for demographics and student learning and your staff surveys, which I've suggested you use the student perception surveys which I created in your final assignment. And also your last assignment you're working on right now, which is to develop a list, a simple list of your school programs and processes. So you've already done that. And I want you to refer to that throughout this video lesson because you can start to see how this could all come together when you're actually looking at data, your data, the data you put together as a result of these assignments. What you do with that data then is to conduct an independent review. In other words, all and each member of your staff would be involved in reviewing the data. We'll talk more about that in a moment. Then you would conduct a small group review, moving from the individual to a small group, and then from small group to a large group, and then you aggregate the commonalities, and the last step is to aggregate the implications. All right? So let's take a look at each one of those things. We talked about creating the data profile. I would suggest you get that data profile, those data profiles, plural, out, so that you can relate to them as we're walking through this video. So you've already done this in chapters 3, 4, 5, and 6 assignments. So what you do then is once you've got the data collected, of course you've got to start with a problem. What is it that you're trying to work on? Let's take something simple like have students improve on the 3 through 8 ELA assessments. All right, so let's say that that's the problem that you're working on just for this hypothetical situation. So you've collected the data on all 4 data sets, all right, and now you ask each individual to independently review the data and fill out this type of a form. What each person is going to do individually is list the strengths and the weaknesses of your school's, in this case, demographic data. What are the implications for your school's continuous school improvement plan? And look at the data presented, and what other demographic data do you think you need to be able to answer the questions, who are we? Now, you're going to have to make some decisions as a building leader right here and now, before you even get started. When you can do the collection of the data, all right, you and your team. But when it comes to this step, where you're having individuals review the data, you've got to decide ahead of time who is going to be reviewing the data. Are you going to require them to do this step, to review this data? Is it going to be a directive from your office, and failure to follow this directive could lead to appropriate disciplinary action being taken against someone, in other words, insubordination? Always try to think 2 or 3 steps down the line as you consider the ramifications of your decisions. Of course, if you do require people to fill this out, you've got to give them a timeline. You got to decide that, and you also have to decide if they're going to fix their name to this or not. It doesn't have to be anonymous. It doesn't have to be attributed to someone. You have to make that decision. But give it some thought ahead of time, and make sure you know what you're doing before you do it, so that you don't have to retrace your steps. So you have your individuals go through each and every step, each and every data set, the demographic data, the perceptions data, the student learning data, and the process and program data, listing the strengths and the weaknesses and the implications for your school's continuous school improvement plan, and what additional data you think you need in order to advance and answer the question, who are we? So we've gone through 2 steps. One is to collect the data and create the data profile. Second is to give the individual data profiles to the individual staff members and have them fill out the forms which we just looked at. And then after that individual step, which they can do in their classrooms during prep times or after school, you've got to give them some time, maybe a week, to get it done. If you give them too long, it'll sit on a desk. If you give them too short, there'll be a lot of complaining that you weren't reasonable. So give people maybe a week to get it done, and then convene everyone together to go through the small group review phase. And you've been through this before. You've seen this in your school setting. You may in fact have practiced it as well at different times. So the next step is the small group review phase. And this is a situation where you have, let's say you maybe have 15 people working on this, and you would create 3 groups of 5 people and put people at separate tables, and they now would review the individual data. And in these small groups, have a staff member share what they saw for strengths, challenges, implications for the continuous school improvement plan, and other data they wish they had, recording commonalities on chart paper. So what you're trying to do is go from the individual responses to small group responses. And once you have those small group responses and agreement, then you move to the next phase, which is your large group consensus phase. So the next step in this process is to take your small group work and bring it to the table and develop a large group consensus of the smaller group conclusions. You combine these small group results to get a comprehensive set of strengths, challenges, and implications, and the data that people think that they still need. And this becomes a set which everyone agrees to. They don't necessarily agree to one strength, one weakness, or one implication, but they agree to a series of them which, most importantly, everyone can agree to. It's a really interesting process to go through this, but it also calls on your facilitation skills in reaching consensus. Here's where I'd like to recommend, in fact, that going through steps 2 and 3, or the step where you work through the small groups and then the large group sessions, is not something for the faint of heart. It's not something for someone to do first time out in a high stakes environment, like working with your entire staff. This is something that you need to practice ahead of time. Maybe you're a teacher leader right now and you have a group of colleagues that you could work this through. It doesn't have to be around data. This process can be used for any problem-solving exercise where you work first with individuals coming up with their notion of what the problem is, and then working that through maybe 3 to 5 small groups to take your 15 or 20 individual opinions, boil that down into, say, 4 or 5 small group opinions, and then boil that down further into one large group consensus. It takes special skills. It's not something that we're born with, and I do recommend that you try to find an opportunity to practice this before you try it live in front of an entire staff. Now, once you move from the large group consensus phase, now you're moving to the aggregate phase where you're aggregating the commonalities. You line up the consolidated commonalities for demographics, perception, student learning, and school processes. And your staff is going to be amazed at what they find and how many different things need to be worked on in order to have a comprehensive school improvement plan. Here's a graphic created by Bernhardt that you can use to make this work. You see across the top, one of the top rows, your demographic data, your surveys, your student learning data, and your school process. And you list here the large group consensus commonalities. And then you aggregate the implications. You aggregate or consider as a whole those highlighted implications. Make a list of the items that must be addressed in the continuous school improvement plan based on data. And here you're going to find some very typical issues start to surface. Issues around, maybe instruction, or assessment, or curriculum, or behavior, or issues around leadership or partnerships, or data, or climate. And I lifted here from Bernhardt's page 98 different typical implications that start to emerge. Or under assessment, for instance, we need to collect more systematic formative data in all subject areas. That very commonly comes up. Around curriculum, how is ELA being taught and how is it being measured on an ongoing basis? These are examples. Under leadership, everyone needs to be a part of professional learning and leadership. Around behavior, you oftentimes see this come up. We need a positive, consistent behavior system school-wide plan to be put in place. So you aggregate together these implications. So what you've done is work from the very specific, the individual opinions, to the small group opinions, to the large group opinions, and then look for commonalities along the implications, and then the issues that need to be addressed when you look at the implications. And when you do this, it's a very rich exercise. You've been through it before. You've been through those exercises where either you or a staff member or an expert comes from outside or sits down with you, and it's after school, it's maybe everyone's tired, or it's during a superintendent's conference day. The superintendent's had his say in the auditorium, and everybody's either all psyched up or all bored after she gets to speak, and now you're back in your buildings and you're working through these types of problem-solving exercises. People are getting up, getting coffee, you've got the charts across the board, your naysayers in the back of the room, and in fact you're going to find naysayers when you do this as well, because figure this, your senior staff, if you're a relatively new building leader, has been through this before. They might have had to go through this with 3 principals in the last 5 years. This happens these days where the tenure of principals and superintendents is so short. Especially in smaller districts, this happens on a regular basis. And so your senior staff has been through this, and now they're being asked to go through it one more time with you. So be patient with them. Learn some of the lessons that Bambrick Santoyo talks about in garnering trust and building a good school climate and including the right people in this mix, and you'll be a lot more successful. Bernhardt recognizes a number of benefits that can be realized when one follows this procedure. It's good that everyone on staff sees all the data about the school and the impact of school processes on student learning results. It's great that the data is broken up into types which are, in smaller amounts, which are doable. Imagine if you had all of the data put on a table and you were given the directive, okay, let's get started developing our school improvement plan. And it doesn't work that way, and breaking up the data and working through a process is very helpful. The staff members, they get feedback from each other, as they analyze the data. They get feedback, they learn from each other, new ideas start to pop up, you get people piggybacking on one idea and coming up with an entirely different one, and it's great. It's actually in and of itself is a great team building exercise. Everyone in the staff contributes to the whole staff analysis through individual and small group work. In essence, everyone gets heard, and this is so important. In addition to setting up the continuous school improvement plan, this comprehensive data analysis provides information that might be included in your school vision, and this is a good a good result as well. So that's a summary of Chapter 7. It's a way to analyze the data in a systematic way where everyone gets involved, and what comes out of it is a comprehensive list of commonalities and implications that need to be worked on in your particular building as you work towards a continuous school improvement plan. Next, we're going to look at Chapter 8, which is delving even deeper into the data. All right, everyone, stay with me now because we're working on Chapter 8, which is the very last chapter that's going to be required as a part of EDU 599. And let me mention again, there are no assignments associated with this video or Chapters 7 and 8, so I hope you find some solace and relief in that. What we're going to do in Chapter 8 is talk about intersections of data, and the 1, 2, 3, and 4-way intersections that you can employ to really delve deeper into the data. Here we have a Venn diagram created, or borrowed you might say, by Bernhardt to illustrate the point. It's that sweet spot in the middle where we're talking about 4-way intersections. But you can talk about 1, 2, and 3-way intersections as well as you analyze your data. And that's what we're going to do right now. Individual multiple measures shown in Chapters 3 through 6, those are easy to understand. And this figure 8.1 shows we can understand each other multiple measures more deeply when we combine 2, 3, and 4 measures together. Now on page 103 of the Bernhardt text, there's a table of possible 2-way and 3-way intersections across the 4 different types of data, and the all-important 4-way intersections that give us the ability to predict what we need to do to meet the learning needs of all students in our schools. This is what it looks like. Intersections that can tell us certain things, and then she provides us with examples. Let's take them one at a time. Let's talk about 2-way intersections, which are demographics by student learning. These intersections can tell if subgroups of students perform differently on student learning measures. Now here's an example. Do students who attend school every day get better grades than students with absences? Good question. And if you remember my class on last Wednesday when we had Principal Eastman in, she talked about her looking at student achievement data, but as it relates to student absences. In fact, you've been doing this when you looked at your student learning data and went to the New York State report cards. You intersected data from demographics with data from student learning. That was a 2-way intersection, because you looked at demographic data, economically disadvantaged students and not economically disadvantaged students, and you looked at their different learning rates as compared to when looking at the New York State ELA, 4th grade ELA assessments. This was an example of 2-way intersections. How about 3-way intersections? Let's take an example. How about demographics by student learning by perceptions? Now this can tell us the impact demographic factors and attitudes about learning environment have on student learning. So demographic factors, attitudes, surveys if you will, and student learning. This is what we're talking about when we talk about a 3-way intersection. Here's an example. Do students of different ethnicities perceive the learning environment differently? And do they score differently on standardized tests in a pattern consistent with these attitudes? I suppose what you could do is, let's take off from the data that I provided you, that make-believe a public high school, where I administered the student safety and security part of the effective schools surveys to that group. Granted, I made up the data, but this is you could if you could break that down further. Take a look at the answers that students gave to that survey, which is your perception survey, but break it as well. In fact, I did. I broke it across economic factors. That was the demographic intersection. In this example that Bernhardt talks about, it's across ethnicities, but I gave you the data across a different demographic factor, and that was economics. And how do those students perform on standardized tests? So this is a three-way intersection. Now let's take a look at the all-important four-way intersection. And rather than looking at it here on Bernhardt's chart, let's look at it in a way that I've prepared for you, which is a takeoff on how I learned my algebra when I went to high school. The priest who taught me algebra at the time would use colored chalk to continue to keep an eye on the variables as they were transmuted and changed as we solved the equation. In this particular case, I've labeled demographic data as red, student learning data as green, perceptions data as pink, and school process data as blue. Going back to Bernhardt's Can Tell Us column, under the four-way intersections, she has can tell us what processes or programs have the impact on different subgroups, etc., etc. I've taken that can tell us question and moved it over to here, because now we're going to be able to look at a four-way intersection between demographic data, red, student learning data, green, perceptions data, pink, and school process data, blue. And Bernhardt's statement was, or question was, what process or programs have the greatest impact on different subgroup of students' learning according to student perceptions and as measured by student learning results? I'm going to give you a moment to take a look at that. Now let's get even more specific. Let's take a look at a hypothetical four-way finding. We had Bernhardt's question. I've rephrased it in a way that I think is real in a public school setting. Here's a hypothetical four-way finding. After analysis of the data, we found that our, here it is, demographic data, our low-income male students who scored at, here's our student learning data, level 1 and 2 on the New York State ELA assessment in 3rd grade, and at a low level 3 in 8th grade. So I'm tracking data, student learning data from 3rd grade to 8th grade. And these students were the ones who participated in the after-school mentoring program. Here's the school process data. So far we have a three-way intersection. We're about to make it a four-way intersection. On average, these same students responded that they did not feel bullied on the most recent school climate survey. So here is a real, I think, hypothetical four-way intersection and a four-way finding. I'm going to give you a moment to take a look at this and digest it. Now what we want to do is talk about how to use intersections to go even deeper into the data. Here's a process that's spelled out by Bernhardt for going deeper into the data. If you're going to develop intersections and use intersections to answer questions, here's how you do it. Here's your first step. You of course have to start with a purpose. What is it you want to know? The purpose can be presented in a statement or a question. For example, grade 8 students are not scoring well on the state math assessments, or why are students not scoring better on 8th grade math assessments? That's your question. Now, step 2 is your questions and data. Think logically about the questions you need to answer to know more about the issue, and consider the data you need to analyze to answer each question. This will lead you into two-way, three-way, and four-way intersections very quickly. So think logically about your question and the data you're going to need to answer your questions. This is hard, but with practice it gets a little bit easier. Then your step 3, gather and analyze the data. And remember, this is not something that you personally have to do. This is something that you would use your staff to do for you, but they can only do it if you phrase good questions. This analysis should lead to understanding the processes that create the results for the different student groups. And a variation would be start with one type of data and consider a question you can answer with that data. Then add another type of data until you use all four types of data. So in other words, build from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 intersections, but do it piece by piece, because it can confound you if you don't think logically and if you don't attack it in doable segments and bits. So without a doubt, two of the most essential skills required to delve deeper into your data is to, number one, know how to ask the right questions, and number two, determine the data you need to answer those questions. Here's an example provided to us by Bernhardt. For instance, types of data. Student learning data. The questions you answer with this type of data are similar to what do our 8th graders know and not know on the 8th grade math assessments. Pretty simple. And the data to gather? Student learning results by item analysis for the past 3 years. Fortunately, this is what Denny Atkinson taught you in the Chapter 5 video. How to get your item analysis from the data warehouse, and so you can look at student results by item and by standard on the New York State assessments over time. You could also do this in-house and take a look at the item analysis that are associated with your products such as iReady and AimsWeb. This would also be very helpful, an example of answering the question that was posed in this matrix. How about student learning by demographics? Who are the students and who are not scoring well on the 8th grade math assessment? That's the right question to ask. The data you need to gather will be student learning results, but by item analysis and by demographics. For instance, gender, ethnicity or race, language proficiency, learning disabilities, indicators of poverty, and mobility. Now, if you needed to look at types of data regarding student learning by demographics by school process, in other words, a three-way intersection, the questions you would answer would be of this type. Are there differences in results on the grade 8 math assessments for the different subgroups of students by the way math is taught? And the data together would be your student learning results by demographics and by classroom. And remember the questions that were posed to you in the Chapter 6 video about taking a look at the way student results shake out when you're looking at the way math is taught. Because in this particular case you're talking about classroom results by individual teacher. And I had you ponder the question, which is oftentimes asked by a board member when you're having presentations on student achievement results. Board member will want to know, well, can we look at these results by teacher? And certainly there's an agenda when a question like that is asked, and it's also very difficult to answer that question on the part of the board member because it's not necessarily confidential information, but it is information that if released could pose problems for you as the principal, for the school, or for the teacher, and it has to be handled very delicately as to how you would deal with it. But that doesn't prevent a building principal or from a leadership team or a team of teachers working on continuous school improvement plan to take a look at the data and see if there are any differences when you look at these three-way intersections. And then the four-way intersections, student learning by demographics, by school process, by perceptions. And the questions you answer with this type of data are, do student perceptions of how they are learning math have any relationship to the scores they are getting? And in this case you'd look at student learning results by demographics, by classroom, and by student perceptions. Now, probably in the end the most powerful notion that Bernhardt gives us is the power of predictive analysis. In other words, by combining what we know about who we are and looking at the data across 4 data sets and matching that with research and what research says about the tendency of certain groups of students to perform in such a way or to experience a set of outcomes, you can now start to predict the outcome that some of your students are going to encounter, and as the leader in the building, do something about it. And this gets us back to what Teresa Gray talked to us all about in the very first video when she talked about the things that we had control over, which were the school processes. If you were to have students who were doing poor with attendance, and you knew that those students then were having difficulty keeping up with their class assignments and grades in that classroom, and if that then led in the high school to a delay in the accrual of credits towards graduation, and then if you looked at the research and found, well, yes, students with poor attendance, poor classroom performance, and behind in credits tend to drop out, well, then you might be able to predict that outcome and actually do something about it. Here's an example of just how that would work. Determine what you want to predict, high school dropouts. Read the research about high school dropouts and what it says. For example, research shows course performance and attendance during the first year of high school are powerful indicators of whether a student will drop out. Then review your historical data to look for patterns to see if those indicators were and are true. Make no assumptions here though, let the data speak. And then finally, locate the students, look at the demographics, and then see if you have students like that. And then if they are in the pipeline, do something about it. Change your processes, your programs, and your systems to try to do something to short circuit that predictable outcome by changing the process between output and input. So that's it. That's EDU 599, chapters 1 through 8. Certainly there's a lot more to the Bernhardt text because it goes on to talk about how you can go further in setting your goals and objectives and your missions and your visions as you work with your continuous school improvement process. But that's beyond the scope of this course. We've really enjoyed this interaction with our students. We hope you have too. As you know, we redesigned the whole course, and at times there were a couple trip-ups, but you all were very patient, and we again hope that you learned. We have, and we hope that you are better future leaders as a result of your participation in this course.